The roadside bar sat like a forgotten relic along Highway 17, its neon sign flickering unevenly in the humid South Carolina night. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of spilled beer, a blend that felt as old as the bar itself. Country music crooned softly from the jukebox, drowned out by the raucous laughter and shouting of locals celebrating the start of the weekend. The polished wood of the bar glimmered faintly under the dim lights, and the air vibrated with the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. At a corner table away from the center of attention sat a woman alone. She was quiet, almost invisible to those around her. A gray hoodie covered her head, shadowing her sharp features, and faded jeans hung loosely on her athletic frame. Her hands wrapped around a glass of water, cold condensation dripping slowly onto the table. She didn't drink alcohol, didn't laugh at the jokes, didn't glance at the television over the bar. She simply observed. Most of the patrons ignored her. She wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention, no bold outfits, no flirtatious smiles, no laughter that invited others in. She was just there. But there was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that made people instinctively hesitate when they approached. Even the regulars, drunk on their own bravado, felt an unspoken tension in the air. One such regular, a man named, was known for his temper and tendency to overstep boundaries. He had a reputation for pushing people too far, especially women who didn't immediately respond to his crude humor. Spotting the quiet woman in the corner, he smirked and swaggered over. His boots thudded against the worn floor, announcing his presence long before he reached her. "You gonna drink that water all night, or are you planning to loosen up?" he slurred, leaning against the edge of her table. The woman didn't flinch, didn't glance up. Her eyes, hidden in the shadow of her hoodie, followed him calmly. She said nothing. Her silence was like a wall, unyielding and immovable. The bartender, a middle-aged man named Roy, wiped his hands on a rag and shot a nervous glance at the woman. He knew trouble when he saw it and was trouble. The waitress, young and jittery, hovered nearby, hoping the situation wouldn't escalate. Chuckled and leaned closer, his breath smelling of whiskey. "A little attitude, huh? Thought this was a friendly place." He smacked her shoulder lightly, a gesture meant to provoke a reaction. He expected her to flinch, to shout, or at least to look startled. She remained still. Her calm was unnerving. The air around her seemed to grow heavier, charged with tension that didn't understand. Every instinct he had told him to back off, yet his ego pushed him forward. He had never encountered anyone who refused to react to his intimidation. He expected compliance. He expected fear. Instead, he met an almost imperceptible shift in her posture. She moved slightly, just enough to signal readiness without aggression. Her eyes, now visible under the hood, were sharp, focused, the gaze of someone who had seen danger and dealt with it countless times. Her calmness was not weakness. It was control. The room began to feel different. Conversation slowed, the jukebox's music fading into the background. Patrons who had been laughing and shouting just moments ago became aware of the subtle tension. Something was happening here that no one had anticipated. Laughed nervously, mistaking the silence for fear. "You okay, sweetheart? You're awfully quiet for someone in a bar full of people." He reached again, this time trying to push her chair slightly, expecting her to react. She didn't. She remained seated, unwavering, her body relaxed yet poised. Her hand brushed lightly against the glass of water, and in that simple movement there was precision, control, and an almost imperceptible readiness that only a trained observer would notice. A few nearby patrons exchanged uncertain glances. Think you should back off," one whispered to another, unsure if the woman could hear them or not. The older men, who had spent decades in the bar and seen fights erupt over less, felt an unfamiliar tension coil in their stomachs. Smile faltered, his overconfidence wavered. The woman's silence was no longer a blank canvas, it was a statement, a warning. She didn't need to shout or push back to command respect. Her quiet intensity radiated through the room, and the unspoken message was clear: don't test her. but drunk and arrogant ignored the warning signs. He leaned closer, a mocking grin on his face, and muttered something meant to provoke her. The woman's eyes flicked to him, unblinking, unshaken. In that instant, the world seemed to pause for a heartbeat. The air thickened, the hum of the bar dropped, and the distance between them felt charged with anticipation. Roy, the bartender, muttered under his breath, "Something's not right, she's different." The waitress clutched a tray nervously, unsure if she should intervene. Patrons continued to watch, drawn into the silent tension like moths to a flame. Oblivious to the storm he had triggered, laughed loudly. "Aw, come on, don't be so serious. It's just a little fun." He gestured broadly, waving his hand toward her, not noticing how all eyes had subtly shifted toward the corner of the room. The woman remained seated, her expression neutral, yet every movement was precise, measured, and deliberate. There was no panic, no fear, no hesitation. Her silence was not emptiness, it was power. And in that small, dimly lit corner of the bar, with beer bottles rattling on tables and neon lights flickering overhead, a quiet storm waited. She didn't know it yet, but the events of the night would test more than arrogance. It would test the very limits of patience, discipline, and strength she had spent a lifetime hunting. And when she finally moved, the bar would fall silent. The bar seemed to hold its breath. Drunk and overconfident, smirked at the woman, oblivious to the weight of the silence that had settled over the room. Patrons who had once been laughing and arguing over pool games now watched the corner table intently, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Even the bartender paused mid-clean, his rag hovering over a glass, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch. Leaned closer, placing his hands on the edge of her table. His voice, thick with alcohol and bravado, carried over the quiet hum of the bar. "You're awfully quiet for someone sitting in my bar, sweetheart. Don't you talk to strangers, or are you scared?" The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and focused beneath her hood, met his without hesitation. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She simply observed, her breathing calm, her posture relaxed yet ready. Every subtle shift in her body betrayed control and training that no casual observer could understand. The regulars shifted in their seats. A few tried to laugh, trying to break the tension. "Hey," one said nervously, "maybe back off a little, yeah." But ignored them, leaning closer, trying to dominate the space. His arrogance and intoxication had dulled his instincts, the very instincts that could have warned him that this woman was unlike anyone he had met. She moved slightly, not to confront him, but to create distance. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, yet it carried authority. Her presence commanded attention. Every eye in the room seemed drawn to her corner. Patrons whispered to each other, voices trembling, "What's wrong with her? Who is she?" "She's different." Misreading the silence as submission, laughed and leaned even closer. He smacked his hand against the table near her water glass. "Come on, don't be so serious. Lighten up, okay?" His tone carried the kind of careless arrogance that had gotten him into trouble before, though never like this. The woman remained seated. Her calmness was unnerving. There was no anger, no fear, no hesitation, only observation. Her eyes scanned him, noting his posture, his balance, and his aggression. Subconsciously, she calculated the best way to neutralize him if he escalated further. She had spent years training her body and mind for such moments, never in a bar fight, but the principles were the same: control, precision, and restraint. The first hint that something was different came from the bartender. Roy whispered to the waitress, "That woman, there's something off about her. Watch her hands." The waitress did, her fingers gripping the tray nervously. Even she could see that the woman's movements were deliberate, each small shift a signal of readiness and skill. Growing more frustrated, shoved the chair slightly. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue," he slurred. The woman's eyes sharpened. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Every patron in the bar felt it, a pause in the chaos of conversation, a quiet before a storm. Expected resistance, an outburst, or at least an exclamation. He got none. Instead, he felt a weight pressing down on him, a sense that he had underestimated her entirely. The room was tense. Patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, trying to appear casual but unable to look away. A few held their drinks tightly, unsure if they should intervene or flee. The jukebox music faded into the background, the laughter of previous minutes replaced with an almost palpable stillness. Laughed nervously, though the confidence in his tone had begun to falter. "Hey, it's just a little fun. Don't get all serious on me." He reached out, attempting to push her shoulder again, a gesture meant to assert dominance. This was the moment. A subtle shift in her posture, the slightest tightening of her core muscles, signaled her readiness. The calm, steady breathing of a trained operative gave her the balance and reflexes necessary to act with lightning speed. She did not flinch, did not shout, and did not overreact. Her mind calculated angles, leverage points, and the quickest way to neutralize the threat without unnecessary force. The patrons leaned forward, sensing movement in the corner, though nothing had yet occurred. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, though he thought it was from the heat or his drinking, not realizing that instinct had begun to scream at him. "Back off." He leaned closer, almost too close, ignoring the subtle warning signals. The woman's eyes flickered slightly to the door behind him, then back to his chest. Every muscle in her body was coiled like a spring, ready to release. Her calm exterior belied the years of training, discipline, and focus that had brought her to this point. She had faced threats far greater than an intoxicated bar regular, and she knew exactly how to control the outcome. Smirked, still trying to assert dominance, but a slight misstep in his posture betrayed his imbalance. The woman's presence alone forced him to hesitate, the first crack in his overconfidence. Patrons leaned back in their chairs, sensing that the moment had shifted. The quiet woman was no longer a passive figure. She was a force waiting to be acknowledged. Suddenly she moved, not with rage, not with chaos, but with precision. Her hand extended, lightly but firmly, guiding his arm behind him. A twist of leverage and he found himself off balance. His feet tangled and he fell forward, landing awkwardly on the floor. A collective gasp rose from the bar, followed by dead silence. The jukebox seemed to pause mid-note, the laughter halted, and even the music of clinking glasses disappeared. All eyes turned to the woman, seated calmly at her table as if nothing had happened. Groaned, struggling to rise, confusion and shock etched across his face. He had expected resistance, yes, but not mastery, not discipline, not control that rendered him completely powerless. She knelt beside him, ensuring he could breathe. Her voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the tension. "You shouldn't attack people." The words were not a threat nor a reprimand. They were a statement of fact, and in that moment the patrons understood. This was no ordinary woman. She was trained, disciplined, and entirely capable of handling threats far beyond the bar's walls. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is she? What just happened?" That was unreal. The bartender shook his head, unable to process the scene. Even humiliated and shaken, could only stammer incoherently. The woman remained composed, returning to her chair, adjusting her hoodie as if she had done nothing remarkable. But the impact of her presence lingered. She had asserted control without anger, neutralized a threat without unnecessary force, and left the room in stunned silence. In the corner, a waitress muttered almost to herself, "Ma'am, who are you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The room, once chaotic, had been transformed. Patrons whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. The woman had revealed her power, her discipline, and her control, and no one would ever forget it. Outside, the humid night pressed against the windows, the neon sign flickering faintly as if acknowledging the calm storm within. Inside the bar, the quiet stranger had become the center of attention, not through words, but through action. The tension had broken, yet the memory of it would linger in every mind present. And somewhere deep inside, the woman knew this was only the beginning. She had acted with precision and restraint, but she was ready for whatever came next. The bar had fallen silent, but her story had only just begun. The bar held its collective breath. lay sprawled awkwardly on the sticky wooden floor, his ego bruised more than his body. The music and chatter had diminished to a faint murmur, each patron frozen mid-breath. The quiet woman remained seated, adjusting her hoodie with calm precision, her eyes still scanning the room. Her gaze returned to, not with anger, but with the clarity and focus of someone who had trained for situations far more dangerous than a drunk man in a roadside bar. Struggled to rise, muttering incoherent excuses and half-hearted threats, his pride now fighting his fear. He had expected the woman to panic or flinch, but she had acted with a level of discipline he couldn't comprehend. His mind, dulled by alcohol, tried to rationalize what had just happened, but every thought was blocked by instinctive recognition. She was not ordinary. The woman leaned forward slightly, her movements minimal yet deliberate. Every muscle in her body was taut, ready for instant action, though her expression remained unreadable. She wasn't moving with rage, but with precision, with calculated intent. The patrons watched in silent anticipation, the tension so thick that the faint hum of conversation seemed almost intrusive. Even the bartender had stopped mid-wipe, rag dangling, his eyes wide with awe. Now on one knee attempted a lunge, a desperate effort to reclaim some semblance of control. His hand shot forward to grab her arm, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Patrons leaned back instinctively, some gripping their drinks tightly, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The tension crackled like static electricity, and the air itself seemed charged with anticipation. With a controlled pivot, the woman moved. Her motion was fluid, precise, almost surgical. She intercepted his arm effortlessly, redirecting his momentum and guiding him to the floor. A twist here, a push there, lunge became a self-defeating motion. He fell forward once again, his balance completely compromised. The room erupted in a collective gasp, though no sound could disturb the gravity of the moment. It was not the force that stunned the patrons, but the skill. The woman had acted without anger, without reckless aggression. Every movement was deliberate, executed with control and expertise that demanded attention. Patrons whispered in awe, trying to articulate what they were witnessing. How did she? I can't, she's unbelievable. The words trailed off, replaced by silent amazement. The woman knelt beside, ensuring he could breathe. Her hands were steady as she adjusted his position, making sure he wasn't in pain. Her voice cut through the silence, calm and precise. You should not attack people. It wasn't a rebuke. It wasn't a threat. It was an undeniable fact, stated with authority that left no room for argument. His face flushed red, a mixture of embarrassment, disbelief, and lingering fear. I did. His words trailed into a stammer. The woman's gaze met his, unwavering and resolute. She did not shout, she did not scold, she simply exuded control, a presence that radiated both power and restraint. Every patron felt it. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, every breath held in quiet awe. The bartender, Roy, muttered under his breath, shaking his head. What just happened? He knew fights, bar brawls, and drunken accidents. But this was something entirely different. This woman's movements were not just skilled, they were professional, precise, and lethal if she had chosen. Yet she had chosen control, mercy, and restraint. The tension that had gripped the bar slowly began to shift. Whispers circulated among the patrons. She's trained. Professional. Navy SEAL, maybe. No one dared speak too loudly, fearing that they might provoke her or distract from the gravity of her presence. She had transformed from a quiet stranger into the center of attention, commanding respect without a word of boasting. Finally upright but clearly shaken, attempted to speak. His words were hesitant, halting, and fraught with the realization that he had underestimated her entirely. I'm sorry. The apology sounded hollow, but it carried the weight of recognition. He had met someone beyond his understanding, someone whose authority transcended the bar's walls. The woman nodded once, acknowledging him without condescension. Her presence demanded nothing but respect. No lecture, no boast, no ego, just a quiet affirmation that power and control are different from aggression and violence. She returned to her seat, adjusting her hoodie and glass with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the encounter. Patrons stared in disbelief. Conversations resumed slowly, but the tone had changed. The bar's usual raucous energy had been replaced with a collective reverence, a subtle acknowledgement of the extraordinary. The quiet woman had done what no one expected. She had neutralized a threat with elegance and precision, leaving the room in awe rather than chaos. A waitress, still holding her tray, whispered to a nearby patron almost in disbelief. "Ma'am, who are you?" The question hung in the air. The woman's calm composure, her disciplined movements, and her unwavering presence had made her a figure of intrigue and admiration. No one expected the truth, and few could imagine the answer. Slumped into a chair at the bar, his pride wounded more than his body, he avoided her gaze, unable to reconcile the events that had just unfolded. He had confronted someone he believed was ordinary, only to discover extraordinary skill and discipline. His bravado had collapsed under the weight of her precision. The bar slowly returned to its rhythm, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. Patrons whispered to one another, retelling the moment they had witnessed. Some replayed the scene in their minds, amazed at the calm efficiency, the measured movements, and the restraint she had shown. Others speculated, guessing at her background, her training, and the experiences that could create such control in a single person. Even the bartender, wiping glasses and muttering to himself, could not shake the image. He had served countless customers over decades, seen hundreds of fights, and yet nothing compared to the quiet woman in the gray hoodie. Her presence had redefined what power looked like, what discipline felt like, and what control could achieve without anger or chaos. The woman, for her part, remained composed. She had acted decisively, ensured safety, and returned to her quiet corner. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of her actions, only calm and observation. Her discipline and restraint had not only neutralized a threat, but also transformed the entire atmosphere of the bar. Outside, the humid night pressed against the neon lights, echoing the tension that had just unfolded inside. The quiet woman had made her presence known without a single raised voice, without unnecessary aggression, and without seeking recognition. The patrons would remember this night for a long time, telling stories of the woman who had struck with precision and left the room in awe. And as she sat, sipping her water, calm and composed, she knew that this encounter was only the beginning. The quiet woman had revealed her skill and control, but the story of who she was and why she could command such power was yet to be fully unveiled. The bar remained eerily quiet after the woman's decisive movements. Even the jukebox seemed muted, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Patrons, previously consumed by their own conversations and laughter, now sat frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The man on the floor groaned softly and tried to regain his composure, but every muscle in his body betrayed him. He knew, deep down, that he had been thoroughly outclassed, and the humiliation burned brighter than any injury. The woman remained seated at her corner table, calm and composed, her gray hoodie slightly draped over her shoulders, concealing her face from casual observation. She adjusted her glass of water with deliberate care, as if nothing had happened, but the energy in the room made it clear she had altered the atmosphere irrevocably. Every patron felt it, from the regulars who frequented the bar nightly to the few travelers passing through on a Friday evening. Something extraordinary had occurred. The bartender, Roy, finally broke the silence. His voice was low and shaky, laced with awe. What just happened?" He glanced nervously at the woman, unsure if he should even ask. Patrons turned their heads, craning their necks, leaning closer to hear the response. One young waitress, unable to contain her curiosity, stepped forward cautiously, tray in hand. Her voice trembled as she addressed the woman. "Ma'am, who are you?" Her words hung in the air, small but powerful, carrying the weight of everyone's unspoken question. She had seen the precision, the calm, and the absolute control, and it didn't match anything she had ever encountered. The woman's eyes met the waitress's, calm and unreadable. She hesitated for a fraction of a second as though measuring whether to reveal the truth. Then quietly she said, "Navy, retired." The words were simple, but the effect was instantaneous. A ripple ran through the bar like a stone tossed into still water. Patrons exchanged shocked glances. "Navy? What?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible. The implication was staggering. Navy and retired. This was no ordinary woman. One man sitting near the jukebox blinked several times, trying to process the information. "Wait, are you saying you're a Navy SEAL?" His words trembled with disbelief. It was the first time anyone in the bar had dared to voice the thought out loud. The room seemed to contract around her, the air thick with tension, astonishment, and awe. The woman didn't confirm verbally. She simply gave a small nod, enough to acknowledge the truth without drawing further attention. Her calmness, even in the face of such shock, only amplified the effect. Every patron understood now why she had moved with such precision, restraint, and absolute control. The silence that had fallen earlier was no longer just the result of shock, it was respect. Whispers began to circulate immediately. "Did you see that? She just handled him like it was nothing. A Navy SEAL here in our bar. No way, no way." The disbelief and admiration were palpable. For the first time, patrons were witnessing something far beyond the ordinary, and it left them both humbled and inspired. Still sitting on the floor, finally looked up at her, his face pale and eyes wide with awe. His earlier bravado had been completely shattered. I didn't know," he muttered, his words faltering under the weight of reality. He had underestimated her completely, and now he understood the true extent of the mistake he had made. The woman remained calm. She did not raise her voice, she did not boast, and she did not display ego. Her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. She had neutralized a threat efficiently, decisively, and with mercy. And now she had revealed enough to ensure that everyone understood the full scope of her abilities. Roy, the bartender, leaned against the bar, still holding a glass. "I've served thousands of people over the years," he muttered to himself, "but I've never seen anything like that." His gaze lingered on her, a mixture of respect and disbelief. He realized that the woman sitting quietly at the corner table had changed the narrative of the bar entirely. Even the regulars, the ones who had dominated the space with their loud voices and confidence, were subdued. They exchanged looks of quiet respect, nodding subtly at one another. The lesson was clear. She was not someone to be underestimated. Her silence, her discipline, and her skill commanded attention and reverence. A few patrons, unable to contain their curiosity, tried to snap photos with their phones. The woman's hand lifted slightly, not aggressively but firmly, signaling them to stop. "No pictures," she said, her voice calm yet authoritative. The room immediately obeyed. Respect for her skill and experience outweighed any curiosity or desire for proof. Her presence alone had established the rules. Whispers continued, growing into conversations, but even then the tone was reverent. "Did you see her move? I can't believe she just did that. A Navy SEAL right here in this little bar." Everyone wanted to discuss her, but none dared approach her disrespectfully. She had shown power tempered with humanity, control without arrogance. Finally rose to his feet, his earlier embarrassment transformed into a cautious respect. He approached her slowly, keeping his distance. I'm sorry," he said, his voice small and humbled. The apology was sincere, carrying the recognition that he had confronted someone far beyond his expectations. She nodded once, acknowledging him without condescension. There was no lecture, no bitterness, no scolding, just quiet acknowledgement. Her control extended beyond physical prowess. It encompassed authority, presence, and an unspoken lesson in humility. The patrons watched the interaction, and the energy in the room began to shift again, this time into admiration. What had started as tension and fear had transformed into awe and respect. The woman's calm efficiency and integrity had won over everyone in the bar, leaving them both impressed and inspired. Some patrons, previously skeptical or dismissive, began to whisper stories among themselves, speculating about her past. "She must have seen combat," one said. "Those movements, you don't just learn that at a gym." "A SEAL, she's a real-life Navy SEAL. I can't believe it." Their voices carried excitement, wonder, and disbelief. The woman, sensing the attention, leaned back slightly. She did not seek validation or praise, but her composure only deepened the sense of reverence surrounding her. Each patron felt as though they had witnessed something rare, almost sacred, an ordinary bar transformed by the extraordinary discipline and presence of a single woman. Even humbled and ashamed, could not help but nod in silent respect. He had entered the bar thinking he could intimidate someone who appeared quiet, weak, or unassuming. Instead, he had encountered skill, precision, and a calm authority that rendered him powerless without anger or aggression. Outside, the humid night pressed against the flickering neon sign, reflecting the quiet storm that had occurred inside. The bar, once just a stop along the highway, had become a stage for an extraordinary display of skill, discipline, and quiet heroism. Every patron would remember this night, recounting it as a story of awe, humility, and respect. And as the woman sipped her water calmly, surveying the room without boast or ego, it became clear. Her identity was no longer a secret, but her presence remained enigmatic. The patrons could only guess at the experiences that had shaped her into the calm, precise, and disciplined individual before them. She was a Navy SEAL, yes, but more than that, she was a symbol of restraint, skill, and humanity in the midst of chaos. The quiet woman finished the last sip of her water, her gaze momentarily drifting toward the flickering neon sign outside. The bar's atmosphere had shifted completely. Whispers, stares, and awe filled the space, yet she remained calm, unaffected by the attention. For everyone else, this was a night of revelation. For her, it was just another evening. She had learned long ago that true strength required humility, and recognition was a fleeting distraction she had long avoided. Outside the bar, the humid night wrapped around the building, pressing gently against the windows. She stepped toward the door for a moment of solitude, needing to breathe in the quiet that had eluded her for decades. Her mind wandered, memories cascading like waves over the shoreline of her past. Every moment, every challenge, every mission she had endured had led to this moment, though she never expected it to unfold in such a small, unassuming bar. She had joined the Navy at a young age, driven by a desire to test herself and protect those who could not defend themselves. Her early years were a whirlwind of discipline and physical challenge, long hours of swimming, running, and training that pushed her body to the limit. The days were grueling, the nights sleepless, and yet she thrived in the chaos. She had always known that strength without control was meaningless, and so she cultivated both in equal measure. Selection for the SEAL program had been the pinnacle of her youth, a crucible that tested not only her body but her mind and spirit. She had faced impossible obstacles, survived brutal training, and endured situations that would have broken many. And through it all, she had learned the most valuable lesson. Silence, observation, and control were as powerful as brute force. Every action carried consequences, and restraint was often the greater strength. Her missions had taken her to distant lands, through conflicts she would never speak of publicly. She had saved lives, neutralized threats, and made decisions in moments of life and death that left an indelible mark on her soul. The world rarely knew her name, and she preferred it that way. Recognition could be a distraction, a vulnerability, and a temptation to pride, none of which she could afford in the field. And yet she had carried the weight of secrecy like a shadow. Few knew her true identity, and fewer still understood the toll it took on her personally. Relationships were fleeting, friendships fragile, and intimacy complicated. Trust was earned slowly, and even then it came with boundaries. She had become comfortable with solitude, finding peace in the quiet moments between chaos. Tonight, in this small South Carolina bar, she had not sought recognition. Arrogance had forced her hand, and her training had guided her actions. But the reactions of the patrons, the awe, the whispers, The sudden respect reminded her of a truth she rarely acknowledged. Her life, her discipline, and her experiences could inspire others, even without a single boast or claim of glory. Her thoughts returned briefly to, sprawled awkwardly at the corner of the bar. The man had acted out of ignorance and arrogance, yet she saw an opportunity in him. She could leave him humbled but unharmed, a lesson learned without unnecessary violence. That was the essence of her discipline, decisive action tempered with restraint. Every movement had purpose, every decision intentional. She had been trained to neutralize threats efficiently, but mercy was often the more difficult and impactful choice. She walked slowly back into the bar, her presence immediately sensed by the patrons. Conversations halted again, as if the room understood that she had returned, and that her story extended beyond what they had just witnessed. No one approached her, but the attention was palpable. Every eye tracked her movements, silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary presence in their midst. As she passed, she offered a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement without judgment. The man hesitated, then muttered another apology, quieter this time, laced with genuine understanding. He had learned in a moment lessons that many could not grasp in a lifetime: respect for skill, recognition of experience, and the humility that comes from facing someone undeniably capable. The patrons around her whispered again, curiosity mingled with reverence. Who was she really? How had she acquired such skill and composure? The answers were far more complex than anyone could guess. Her story was not one of instant heroism or random luck. It was the culmination of years of training, sacrifice, and silent dedication to a life of service. Memories of her missions played vividly in her mind. She recalled the heat of deserts, the freezing winds of mountain operations, the tension of missions where a single misstep could cost lives. Each memory reinforced her belief in preparation, discipline, and control. Every challenge she had faced had honed her body and mind, shaping her into someone capable of handling threats with precision and composure. She thought of the people she had protected, the lives saved quietly without recognition, without medals displayed publicly. That was her true reward. The knowledge that her actions had meaning, that she had made a difference in situations few could comprehend, sustained her through years of training, deployment, and the inevitable personal sacrifices. Now in this bar, in the quiet of the evening and the astonished stares of onlookers, a small fragment of that life surfaced. Her skill, honed over decades, had manifested in a single, precise action. Yet the recognition, fleeting and modest, was enough to remind her of the impact one person could have, even quietly, even without fanfare. She sat again at her corner table, the dim light casting soft shadows across her features. The bar had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the energy was forever altered. Patrons whispered to one another, recounting the precision, control, and calm authority they had witnessed. They could not know her full story, but the impression she left was undeniable. Her past was a mosaic of discipline, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. Every mission, every grueling training session, every decision to act with restraint rather than aggression had shaped the woman sitting before them. And though she preferred to remain anonymous, her presence alone had conveyed lessons of respect, humility, and the extraordinary potential within a single individual. She looked out the window once more, the neon glow reflecting faintly in her eyes. This life she had led, secret, disciplined, demanding, had left her both alone and profoundly capable. She had learned that strength was not about dominance or display, but about control, compassion, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. And in that quiet moment, she allowed herself a small, rare smile. The bar, the patrons, the whispers of awe, they were fleeting, ephemeral. But the impact of her presence, her choices, and her disciplined life was enduring, invisible but undeniable. She had faced danger countless times, and yet, it was in this ordinary bar that her extraordinary life was finally glimpsed, if only for a moment. She returned to her glass of water, sipping calmly, unbothered by the stares and whispers around her. The patrons continued to talk quietly, their voices filled with curiosity and admiration. They did not know her full story, but they felt its weight. She was a symbol of strength, restraint, and humanity, a living testament to the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that her life, her story, and her presence had made a mark, quiet, subtle, and enduring, on everyone in that room. The bar had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the tension that had gripped it earlier lingered like a ghost. Patrons spoke in hushed tones, retelling the extraordinary events that had unfolded, their voices mingling awe with disbelief. The woman in the gray hoodie remained seated in her corner, calm, composed, and completely unbothered by the attention. Every movement she made was deliberate, measured, and controlled, reinforcing the quiet authority she radiated. The man who had caused the disturbance sat slumped at the edge of the bar, nursing his bruised pride and ego. He avoided eye contact with anyone, aware that every patron now regarded him with a mixture of pity and respect for the woman who had just bested him. His bravado had been replaced by a simmering humility. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly small and powerless in the presence of someone he could neither dominate nor understand. He fidgeted, his fingers tapping nervously against the bar's worn surface, until he finally mustered the courage to approach the woman. His voice was hesitant, tinged with both embarrassment and genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. The words hung in the air, sincere yet awkward, reflecting a man grappling with the reality of being confronted by true skill and discipline. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes meeting his briefly. There was no malice, no scolding, no satisfaction in her expression. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the apology without condescension. That simple gesture spoke volumes. Her strength was not about domination or pride. It was about precision, restraint, and dignity. Felt the weight of her presence, understanding that his actions had been met with mercy, not vengeance. The room was silent again, patrons leaning forward in their seats, curious to see how the interaction would unfold. Every eye was on them, yet the woman treated the scene as ordinary, almost mundane, despite the extraordinary skill she had just demonstrated. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension still lingering in the air. Shuffled awkwardly, his voice faltering. I didn't realize," his words trailed off, the realization dawning on him that he had underestimated someone far beyond his comprehension. He had acted out of arrogance and ignorance, expecting fear or submission. Instead, he had encountered calm, controlled authority that required no shouting, no forceful demonstration. He had faced someone who could neutralize him effortlessly yet chose restraint. The woman's gaze softened slightly. "You need to think before you act," she said calmly. Her words were not harsh, they were simple, direct, and unmistakably true. Absorb the lesson, feeling it sink into him. There was no anger in her voice, only clarity, a clarity that forced him to confront his own recklessness. Patrons murmured quietly among themselves. "She's incredible," one whispered, "and she didn't even need to yell or hurt him." Another added, "That's real strength, control without aggression." The lesson extended beyond. Everyone in the bar, whether they realized it or not, was absorbing a profound example of how power and discipline could coexist with humility and mercy. Straightened slightly, his embarrassment giving way to something more reflective, he hesitated, then nodded toward the woman. "I thank you," he said, his tone sincere. I shouldn't have," he paused, struggling to articulate the humility he now felt. The words were imperfect, but the sentiment was genuine. The woman's nod was her only reply, but it carried far more weight than any long-winded explanation could. In that single gesture, she conveyed acknowledgement, understanding, and forgiveness. The act of showing mercy had transformed the interaction, leaving both the instigator and the witnesses with a profound sense of respect and reflection. The bartender, Roy, watched the scene with fascination. He had seen countless bar fights, but this was unlike anything he had ever witnessed. It wasn't just the skill displayed, it was the lesson, the restraint, and the quiet authority that left every person in the room altered in some subtle way. He realized that this woman's presence had elevated the ordinary setting into something extraordinary. Patrons began to murmur again, this time with reverence rather than fear. Conversations circled around the lesson had received, the skill of the woman and the rare display of mercy. "I can't believe she just handled that," one said, "and she didn't even raise her voice." Another whispered, "There's so much to learn from just watching her." The bar was alive with quiet admiration, the air charged with inspiration. Now fully aware of his mistake, slowly returned to his seat. He sat down heavily, the weight of humility pressing on him. He watched the woman with a new sense of understanding. He had thought himself strong, capable, and fearless, but in the presence of true skill and control, he realized how much he still had to learn. The lesson was humbling, and he accepted it without resentment. The woman, for her part, returned to her quiet routine. She sipped her water, adjusted her hoodie, and observed the bar without judgment. Her role had been played. She had neutralized the threat, taught a lesson, and ensured no one was harmed unnecessarily. She had acted with precision, discipline, and mercy, the hallmarks of a life trained for control and restraint. As the evening wore on, patrons slowly returned to their drinks and conversations, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The bar, once filled with casual laughter and drunken bravado, now carried a subtle respect for presence, skill, and discipline. People spoke more thoughtfully, interacted more carefully, and carried a quiet awareness of the extraordinary event they had just witnessed. The story of the woman in the gray hoodie, the Navy SEAL who had silently and efficiently neutralized a threat, began to spread immediately. Patrons shared their observations, replaying the scene with awe. Each retelling emphasized her calm authority, her precision, and her merciful approach. The legend of the night grew organically, fueled by genuine astonishment rather than exaggeration. Though humbled and quiet, began to understand a new kind of respect, one that extended beyond him to the room, to the patrons, and to the woman herself. He realized that strength was not about dominance, intimidation, or ego. Real strength, he saw, was about control, discipline, and the ability to act decisively yet mercifully. As the bar slowly settled into a quieter rhythm, the woman remained a focal point, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence naturally commanded it. Patrons occasionally glanced her way, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and all with an unspoken acknowledgement of her extraordinary capabilities. The night carried on, but its imprint was indelible. Had learned a lesson in humility and respect, the patrons had witnessed a rare display of skill and discipline, and the woman had demonstrated the quiet power that came from a lifetime of training and experience. Her actions had turned a chaotic situation into an opportunity for reflection, growth, and inspiration. And as she left the bar later, unnoticed by most, the subtle transformations lingered. His demeanor had shifted from arrogance to reflection. Patrons whispered stories to one another, recounting the precision and discipline they had witnessed. The bar itself seemed different, infused with the quiet energy of someone extraordinary. In her footsteps, the woman left a trail of lessons, not just for the patrons, but for anyone who understood the deeper meaning. Strength is not measured by dominance, skill is not measured by aggression, and true authority is expressed through calm, decisive action tempered by mercy. That night the bar was no longer ordinary. It had been touched by quiet heroism, by precision, and by the subtle power of someone who had lived a life of discipline and service. Had learned his lesson, the patrons had witnessed something rare, and the woman in the gray hoodie remained, as always, composed, observant, and profoundly capable. By the morning after the incident, the bar had already become the talk of the town. The story of the quiet woman in the gray hoodie had traveled far beyond the wooden walls and neon lights where it had occurred. Social media posts and messages pinged into phones of locals, travelers, and even the occasional journalist. "You won't believe what happened at the Riverside bar last night," read one post. A woman, calm and composed, just neutralized a drunk guy who was harassing people like something out of a movie. The patrons who had witnessed the event firsthand found themselves retelling it repeatedly, their voices tinged with awe and excitement. Every recounting seemed to grow slightly more dramatic, not because they were exaggerating, but because the memory of her calm precision, her subtle authority, and her extraordinary control left an indelible mark on their minds. They could not fully articulate the feeling she had left behind, but everyone agreed on one thing: she was exceptional in a way they had never seen before. Now fully aware of the lesson he had received, carried it with him long after leaving the bar. Friends and colleagues noticed a subtle change in his behavior. He no longer boasted or acted aggressively. He listened more, approached situations cautiously, and seemed to weigh his words carefully. The experience had humbled him in a way that no lecture or punishment ever could. He spoke quietly to his friends, sometimes shaking his head in disbelief. I underestimated her. Completely. She wasn't just fast or strong, she was precise, calm, and in control. Everything I thought about power I had to rethink. The bar itself became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Regulars, travelers, and curious onlookers returned, hopping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had transformed a simple Friday night into something extraordinary. Some arrived early, waiting in anticipation, scanning every corner and every shadow. Others came later, asking questions of the bartender, Roy, who had become an unofficial storyteller of the events. He recounted her movements with careful attention to detail, emphasizing her calm authority and remarkable control. "I've seen fights before," he would say, "but nothing like her. She was precise, patient, and utterly unflappable. You couldn't take your eyes off her." As the tale spread, the woman became something of a local legend. People began referring to her with reverent nicknames: the Gray Hoodie, the Quiet Storm, the Bar's Guardian. None of these names mattered to her. She had no interest in fame, accolades, or attention. Yet her actions had inspired admiration, awe, and curiosity, and her presence was slowly becoming larger than life in the imaginations of the townspeople. Journalists and bloggers even picked up the story, drawn to the uniqueness of a woman whose life experiences had led to such precision and control. One article described her as a retired Navy SEAL whose calm composure and skill turned an ordinary bar into a scene of awe and discipline. Readers shared the story widely, commenting on the lessons of humility, respect, and controlled strength. Many remarked that her example was not just about physical skill, but about character and restraint, qualities increasingly rare in the world they inhabited. Despite the growing attention, she remained elusive. No one could say when she might return or if she even intended to. Patrons recounted that she had left quietly, without fanfare or acknowledgement, her presence lingering in the room like a faint yet unshakable memory. It was this quiet strength, combined with her extraordinary skill, that captured the imagination of everyone who had witnessed her actions. Local businesses even began to incorporate the story into casual conversation. "Did you hear about the woman at Riverside?" one shopkeeper would ask another. "Yeah, Navy SEAL, retired. She neutralized a guy like it was nothing. Incredible." Such conversations spread the legend further, embedding her story into the town's collective memory. Even strangers visiting the area would hear about her, adding a sense of mystique and admiration that extended far beyond the walls of the bar. Once brash and arrogant, found himself a participant in this evolving legend. He quietly shared his first-hand account, describing the precision of her movements, the calm authority in her gaze, and the lessons he had learned in humility and restraint. He explained how she had neutralized the situation without anger, without excessive force, and without ego. His recounting became part of the lore, offering an authentic perspective that lent credibility to the growing mythos surrounding her. Meanwhile, the patrons who had witnessed the events firsthand found themselves changed, too. Some had learned a lesson in humility, others in the importance of restraint, and many simply marveled at the extraordinary potential hidden within a single individual. It was as if the bar itself had become a classroom, teaching lessons in human behavior, discipline, and respect. The quiet woman had transformed an ordinary space into an arena for reflection and inspiration, leaving behind a legacy of awe and admiration. Even months later, people would visit the bar and ask about her. They would recount the story to new patrons, ensuring that the memory of that night endured. "You should seen her," one would say. "She didn't just stop him, she commanded the room without raising her voice. You could feel it. You could feel the discipline." The tale became a benchmark for discussions of respect, authority, and human potential. What truly set her apart, however, was her invisibility and fame. No one knew her full story, her missions, or her life outside that night. And perhaps that was part of the power she wielded, the idea that extraordinary skill and discipline could exist quietly, without need for recognition. Her legend was fueled by action and presence, not words, and that made it resonate all the more. By the end of the year, the story had taken on mythic qualities. Parents would tell their children, travelers would recount it to friends, and regulars would relive it with a sense of awe. It became less about the incident itself and more about the qualities the woman embodied: courage, precision, discipline, and restraint. The legend grew organically, rooted in reality but elevated by the universal admiration for skill combined with humanity. And somewhere in the quiet moments, the woman observed the ripple of influence she had created. She did not seek it, nor did she revel in it, but she understood its significance. Every lesson absorbed by those who had witnessed her actions, every moment of reflection sparked in and the patrons, every whispered retelling of the story, these were all manifestations of the impact a disciplined, controlled, and courageous individual could have on the world around them. The bar itself became symbolic. It was no longer just a place for drinks and conversation. It had become a stage for extraordinary example, a place where the quiet power of one person could transform a room, a community, and the way people perceived courage and control. Patrons and visitors would leave with the memory of that night etched in their minds, carrying lessons and inspiration far beyond its walls. In quiet reflection, the woman acknowledged the effect of her actions without pride or ego. She had acted decisively, demonstrated skill, and shown mercy. She had imparted lessons without teaching, inspired respect without words, and created a legend through presence and precision alone. Her story, though rooted in reality, had taken on a timeless quality, a reminder of the extraordinary potential hidden in discipline, courage, and humanity. The legend of the quiet woman in the gray hoodie, the retired Navy SEAL who had struck with precision, tempered by mercy, and commanded respect without words, would continue to grow. It was no longer confined to the walls of the bar. It existed in the whispers of the town, in conversations among travelers, and in the quiet reflections of those who had witnessed her power. She had become more than a person. She had become an example, a living testament to the extraordinary potential within ordinary lives. Even as the town continued with its daily routines, the memory of her presence lingered like an unspoken truth. Patrons would glance at the corner table, half expecting to see her again, half knowing that her legend was far larger than any single appearance. Transformed by the encounter, would carry the lesson forward in his own life. And the bar itself, forever touched, would remain a symbol of the impact that one extraordinary individual could have, quietly, without need for recognition or fame. The bar had long since returned to its casual rhythm, though the atmosphere remained forever altered. Patrons sipped their drinks and exchanged quiet conversations, their words tinged with a newfound respect for discipline, skill, and quiet authority. The woman in the gray hoodie sat at her corner table, calm and composed, sipping her water as if the extraordinary events of the evening were ordinary. But in truth, the bar itself had been touched by something unforgettable, something that would echo in the minds of everyone present for years to come. Outside, the neon lights reflected off the humid pavement, casting fleeting shadows across the street. The quiet woman paused for a moment at the door, her eyes scanning the night as if ensuring that order had returned. She had long ago learned the value of vigilance, of quiet observation, and of acting decisively when required. Tonight had been no different, yet it would be remembered differently, not for the altercation itself, but for the lessons embedded in every precise action she had taken. Word of the evening's events spread quickly. Social media posts, whispered and retold stories circulated throughout the local community. People described a woman who had neutralized a threat effortlessly, who had displayed strength, skill, and discipline without arrogance, and who had inspired awe through her calm, commanding presence. The bar became a legend overnight, not because of chaos, but because of the extraordinary demonstration of humanity tempered by skill. The man who had caused the confrontation found himself reflecting deeply on his actions. He had entered the bar seeking confrontation, fueled by arrogance and alcohol, but had left humbled. The encounter forced him to confront his ego, recognize the limits of his understanding, and appreciate the power of restraint. For the first time, he understood that real strength did not come from aggression, but from control, precision, and the courage to act decisively yet mercifully. He shared his experience with friends and family, recounting the woman's movements, her presence, and the quiet authority that had left him both shaken and enlightened. "I've never seen anything like it," he admitted. "She wasn't just skilled, she was disciplined, calm, and precise. I can't even describe it fully, but it changed the way I see strength and respect." His words spread, adding to the growing legend of the woman in the gray hoodie. The patrons, too, carried the experience forward. Conversations in local cafes, workplaces, and homes began to include references to the night at the bar. "Did you hear about the woman who handled that guy without even yelling? Yeah, Navy SEAL, retired, calm as anything. I wish I could be like her, controlled, skilled, and respectful." Her example resonated, not because she sought fame, but because her actions spoke universally about discipline, integrity, and quiet heroism. For the woman herself, the attention was irrelevant. She never sought recognition, nor did she desire it. Her life had been one of service, discipline, and quiet sacrifice. The missions she had undertaken, the challenges she had faced, and the discipline she had cultivated were not meant for admiration. They were the foundation of who she was. Yet she understood quietly that her presence had made a difference. She had imparted lessons without teaching, inspired respect without words, and demonstrated authority without domination. As days passed, the story of the night at the bar became part of the local lore. New patrons would visit the establishment, hopping to catch a glimpse of the legendary figure. Regulars would recount the events, embellishing the awe-inspiring movements, the calm precision, and the quiet power. And while the story grew, the essence remained unchanged. She had acted with restraint, courage, and humanity, leaving an indelible impression on everyone who witnessed her skill. The woman herself returned to her routine, observing the world with the same quiet vigilance that had guided her through decades of training and missions. She understood the importance of living by principles, of acting decisively when necessary, and of maintaining discipline in both thought and action. Her life, though often solitary and demanding, was rich in purpose, driven by the knowledge that her choices had weight and meaning. In reflecting on the events, she considered not with anger but with understanding. He had acted out of ignorance and pride, and she had acted to teach, protect, and neutralize a threat without harm. It was a lesson in humility and respect, one that would shape him and others who heard the story. Through such encounters, she realized that her skills were not just tools of combat, they were instruments of influence, capable of inspiring growth and reflection in those around her. The bar, too, became a symbol. Patrons would recall that night not for the alcohol consumed, nor for the music played, but for the extraordinary display of calm authority and precision. It became a lesson in human potential, a reminder that discipline, skill, and mercy could transform ordinary spaces into arenas of learning and reflection. The quiet woman had left a legacy, not of violence, but of respect, courage, and control. Years later, the story would continue to be told. Transformed by the encounter, would carry the lesson into his life, influencing his decisions, relationships, and approach to challenges. Patrons and locals would recount the tale to newcomers, each retelling reinforcing the values of humility, discipline, and the quiet power of restraint. And though she would remain largely anonymous, her impact would persist, rippling through the community like a subtle but undeniable force. The woman, having returned to her own quiet life, understood that true influence was not measured by recognition or fame. Her legacy was in the lessons silently absorbed by those who witnessed her actions. It was in the humility sparked in a man who had underestimated her. It was in the awe and respect of the patrons, who carried the memory forward as a subtle guide to behavior, courage, and integrity. In the end, the bar had become more than a place to drink. It had become a testament to the extraordinary within the ordinary, a reminder that strength and discipline could manifest in quiet, powerful ways. And at the center of it all, the woman in the gray hoodie remained unchanged. She had acted with precision, courage, and mercy, leaving a mark far deeper than any altercation could produce. As the night fell once again and the neon lights flickered over empty streets, she walked away, unnoticed by most, yet unforgettable to all who had seen her. Her life, her training, and her presence had left an enduring impression, a quiet legacy of skill, restraint, and humanity. The bar, its patrons, and the man she had humbled would remember that night forever, not for its conflict, but for the extraordinary display of character and mastery that had transformed an ordinary moment into legend. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, the woman allowed herself a rare smile. Not for recognition, not for fame, but for the knowledge that her life, her discipline, and her actions had made a difference, however small, in the world around her. She was a Navy SEAL, yes, but more than that, she was a symbol of the extraordinary potential that lay within quiet courage, controlled power, and selfless action. The story of the quiet woman who struck the arrogant man, who left the bar in stunned silence, would live on, not just as a tale of skill, but as a lesson in restraint, humility, and human potential. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the memory would endure as a reminder that extraordinary lives often unfold in quiet, unassuming ways, leaving indelible marks on the hearts and minds of those who are ready to see them.